Hey Kitty's Triple Feature Tuesday is back, and just in time for Friday the 13th in October! That's right. I mean, usually we get like at least one Friday the 13th a year. If not, some good times we get two. And then there have been some really horrifying years where there's no Friday the 13th, which is just, you gotta come up with ways to entertain yourself in those years. But this year, we get not only a Friday the 13th, it's in October. October, Friday the 13th. And that means extra, extra special. And doing a pretty great trio of Friday the 13ths that pit Jason, our mighty avenger for 80s morality, against creatures of equal metal to determine who is the bigger monster. They're just a lot of fun, because a lot of the slasher formula by nature, the killer can't be overly powerful or else there's no way for the final girl or guy to survive. The heroes can never be too powerful in contrast, because, then they just take out the slasher, because, usually a slasher is just a human being. In these, Jason is full-on unkillable undead zombie monster. And so, the stakes have to be raised on both his end and their end, so he is put up against these gigantic threats that he, most of the time, is the equal of. I mean, at the end of the day, he's probably going to lose, because, he's the bad guy, and good has to triumph. It usually just does. Friday the 13th, there's not a lot of trick endings in terms of Jason coming back. I mean, in the early ones, there used to be, just like a last little, Carrie-esque scare where something would pop out that would sort of be a non sequitur for the whole thing. But there's no usual, and Jason's lurking, and he pops out at the very end with any, an actual reality. We're going to look at 3 movies in which Jason is versing something that is pretty serious. Our menu is going to include Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, Jason X, and Freddy vs. Jason. One of the many fun things about Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, which is honestly, this is my personal favorite Friday the 13th. If I had to, it's not the one I show to people when they want to, see what a Friday the 13th looks like, but if they ask me what my favorite one is, it's this one. It originally the idea for it did start out as Freddy vs. Jason way back in 1988. Paramount had the idea to, recreate old horror movies where you'd have Wolfman meets Frankenstein or Frankenstein meets Dracula type of thing, because it's let's see our monsters fight each other, because, we're guys. Paramount brought the idea to New Line, and because they thought it was a good idea. And New Line, when they heard the idea, they thought it was a great idea. And so New Line was all for it, as long as Paramount sold Jason to New Line, and Paramount was all for it as long as New Line sold Freddy to Paramount. And oddly enough, neither one of them wanted to budge on that, and so it didn't happen for over 17 years. Eventually, Paramount did sell Jason to New Line Cinemas, and thus paving the way for the movie that we will talk about later. But they still had to make this 7th Friday the 13th movie. They had just brought Jason back in number 6, because as you recall, he was dead after number 4 and is not in number 5. There's so much going on. So we got to do our Jason movie, and we want it to be a bit more bombastic. So I got it. Let's do Jason versus Carrie, which is essentially what this movie is about. Tina, played by Lar Park Lincoln, and her bangs, is a psychic / telekinetic teenage girl who has all sorts of unresolved parent-daddy issues, mainly because he was an alcoholic and abused him and his mother, and she sort of kind of accidentally drowned him in Crystal Lake. Cut to something like 10 or so years later, Dr. Weekend at Bernie's is trying to help her overcome these issues, but really just kind of study her, and brings her back to Crystal Lake to try to work through her issues. And as she's trying to work through her issues, her psychic abilities kind of sort of accidentally resurrect Jason Voorhees, who, as you remember, is an undead, unstoppable killing machine. And so Jason does what he always does, go through all the local teenagers in the land. This one's fun because there's no real reference to any sort of camp. It's all just lake houses on Crystal Lake, and as for all of these movies, it just so happens there's a lot of teenagers and early 20-somethings of, all sorts of varied interests and social strata hanging out in a house next to this one, and so they're all gonna die, and they do, and in not necessarily rapid succession, but it's definitely the movie definitely moves as a good clip so that we can push Tina and Jason to their big confrontation at the end, and boy, it doesn't disappoint. That's sort of the underlying theme of all three of these Versus movies, is that none of them disappoint. They are everything you want them to be in terms of Jason fighting something that is tougher than Jason. Because, again, it's basically Carrie. She has mind over matter abilities, and she just... God, he is just a tank, because he just keeps taking punishment after punishment and keeps coming back. All you can do is throw things at Jason. Tina is perpetually running away, but, the thing she's doing to him before she runs away is great. Like, it starts off with her pulling down an electrical cable and zapping him to death, but, that doesn't work, which is weird, because, the electricity brought him back to life in the previous movie, but didn't this time. We're not going to get into that. Then he chases her back to... the neighboring kid's house, and she throws, I think, a potted plant, a table, full like 3-person sofa, and then when he busts through all of that, she brings like the whole awning over the patio deck down on him. Nope, still not. There's a lot of great gags with the telekinesis, because she uses it to tighten his mask so much that it bops off, and then she uses a electrical cable inside, so like the internal wiring of a house, to try to hang him, and then just knock him down a flight of stairs, and then throw him through like another floor into the basement, and then set fire to him and everything. And it's not until she somehow is able to resurrect her father, who has been in the lake this entire time because they never got him out from the water in which he drowned. She resurrects him, and he brings Jason back down into the depths, because apparently only the undead can take out the undead in Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. But, oh, boy. That's just the beginning. We cut ahead X amount of years in real life, and then also in the film series to Jason X, Robo Jason, in space. And it wasn't really until I was thinking about this triple feature that it dawned on me that the whole movie is essentially just a gauntlet for Jason. I don't know why I don't think about these movies more in terms of Jason's perspective going through all of them, but I need to work on that, because I always just get, bogged down in our protagonists and their struggle to overcome Jason and his oppressive brand of Reagan-esque morality. Silly. It's in the future. The word is out on Jason. He has been captured and imprisoned in some sort of military facility to try to figure out how to dispose of the unkillable bastard. And, of course, everything goes wrong because scientists, played by David Cronenberg, want to experiment on him and recreate him and just make everything worse. And so it begins a succession of things that Jason has to kill, which begins with, fairly current military unit of like 28 or so guys that Jason just mows through, because, they're still just human. They've got guns, but it's Jason. And it's like Kane Hodder Jason. This is the last movie that Kane Hodder plays Jason. So, I mean, he is a prime Kane Jason. He gets frozen for about like 100 or so years, and then gets unfrozen in space and has to go up against, future space army people. Like, think the Colonial Marine Corps from Aliens. And, they're tough. They have more futuristic guns. But, still just Jason. Just Jason kicking the shit out of everything. And he's not taken down until he goes up against a robot. So we go from like normal military to future super military to killer sexy android lady. KM something or other is her name, and she gets like special. She is a teacher assistant bot, but she gets like reprogrammed to be like the ultimate badass with like super guns and leather and big boots and she just blows the shit out of him until he's literally in pieces. Jason loses this fight, which is kind of sad because it's like arms missing, legs missing, a whole chunk of him's missing, and didn't look too good for New Jersey's favorite son until the Medibot, nanite future tech thingies revive him because they don't know any better and revive him into a cyborg. So he's half undead killer zombie, half robot, all cop. And now he is more than a match for our android, and he reduces her just to a head that is perpetually being brought around from scene to scene. And it's not until the very end of the movie that he like goes up against his last verses and is finally taken down for real. And that's Brodsky. Sergeant Brodsky, played by Peter Mensah, is literally the toughest guy in any Friday the 13th ever. He is the head of all the Colonial Space Marines. He leads them into battle, which, you know, as I mentioned, fails miserably. And it's like the most badass moment ever. He gets stabbed through the ribs, and like through a wall, Jason stabs him with his machete through his stomach, and all he does is go, "Make a little poke in the ribs, good enough to take down this old dog." And then Jason obliges him by stabbing him with another thing through the wall and through his ribs again, and still, you know, not phased at all, just goes, "Yep, that ought to do it." But it doesn't. That doesn't take him out, and he ends up being one of the key factors in KM winning the fight against still, you know, just zombie Jason. And then he's brought, you know, back to full health with the nanite thingies. At the end of the film, Jason is about to get onto the escape ship and continue his reign of destruction on everything until Brodsky stops him. And Brodsky's just in a spacesuit, beating the shit out of him, and it's enough to stop him for like a minute until Jason gets away and is flying towards the escape ship again until Brodsky comes out of nowhere, takes him down, and starts riding him into the atmosphere of a nearby planet. It's up for debate who is winning that fight. Brodsky, who is going to melt, or Jason, who is also going to melt but will probably be, you know, able to revive afterwards. And I would say the answer lies in who is topping and who is bottoming. Now we go forward in release dates, but back in time, continuity-wise, to Freddy vs. Jason, which, I gotta tell you guys, was just a religious experience for me. I mean, there are a few movies that they're built up in your mind so much that when you actually see them, they are exactly what you want them to be. And Freddy vs. Jason was. I mean, the teenagers there have been stronger teenagers in Nightmare on Elm Street movies, but there have been dumber teenagers in Friday the 13th movies, and so they sort of erred on that side. But, oh my god, they came up with so much plot for this movie to actually explain why they're fighting, and it all sort of works if you kind of want to go with it. Like, there are worse strains in terms of suspension of disbelief. But suffice it to say, Freddy tricks Jason into killing for him and then won't stop, which pisses Freddy off. And so we have to fight. And guys, the fight is the full last half hour to 40 minutes of the film. Like, you know, you get these movies where it's just like, oh, we're building up to this big fight, and then it either lasts 5 minutes and then they're buddies afterwards, or, you know, it just wasn't that impressive to begin with. This movie is Freddy vs. Jason. It's Freddy vs. Jason through the whole thing, but then this last bit just seals the deal. And it has like 3.5 great rounds to it. Like, the first one all takes place in the dreams, and Freddy's just kicking the shit out of Jason, even though Jason is just not dying from it because he's Jason. And then round 2, Freddy gets pulled into the real world, and Jason is getting the upper hand. But I liked how they went with the whole Freddy is more than just, you know, a human in dreamland that has special powers. He's more demonic at this point. And so he has above average survival skills in fighting Jason, and they are just beating the shit out of each other. Like, Freddy has all these tricks in the dream world in terms of telekinesis and reality manipulation. But when it comes down to fighting in the real world, no, they're just brawling. They're beating the shit out of each other for like 20 minutes of round 2. And then they both get knocked onto the dock for the climactic round 3 when they're both just beat to shit and they are just wailing on each other. And there's all this great blood coming out of both of them, even though neither of them are alive or really human anymore. But they're just, just to show how brutal the whole thing is. And they're losing appendages and they're beating each other with the appendages until a giant explosion happens, but they're still not dead until they finally sort of do an Apollo Creed, Rocky Balboa at the end of Rocky 2. Like, both of them punch each other at the same time and both fall down. And so it sort of looks like that's the end. And then, until the very last shot of the movie, in which Jason emerges from the water. Clearly, the victor. Except he's holding on to Freddy's head. Thus just underscoring it even more that he's totally won. Except Freddy's head comes alive and winks at the camera because Freddy's always going to win. Because Freddy is the best. Even though this is Jason's day, and, we don't want to take that away from him. Because, oh man, did he try. But it's Freddy. I mean, come on. As much as I love Jason, Freddy's just my guy. But, oh, man. Jason versus everything. Jason is just killing it. Literally, figuratively. Just surviving and excelling and murdering everything. And we're going to watch all these movies in rapid succession. And it's going to be amazing. And I hope all of you guys figure out your own ways to have fun on a Friday the 13th in October. I would suggest, however, unlike a friend of mine who is actually renting a cabin in the woods this weekend, that's probably asking for trouble. So don't do that. Stay safe on your Friday the 13th in October, and hopefully I'll see you guys on a more regular basis because there's time now.